The sky was overcast in Springfield when several luxury cars pulled up in front of the Miller family home.
"If you marry Alexander for me, Brady and I will be so grateful to you," Lily said.
Samantha looked at her sister with an expression of horror. Lily had an innocent expression on her undeniably beautiful face, but Samantha was devastated at the thought of what she was being asked to do. Lily had stolen Samantha's boyfriend, Brady Jackson, and had told her that she needed to take her place and marry Alexander Brown, a man from a wealthy family whom neither of them had met. It was rumored that Alexander was disfigured, ugly, and sickly, and that he was very eccentric with a bad temper. "The only reason I'm doing this is so that Thomas can continue to get his treatment," Samantha said. Thomas Miller was Samantha's brother, who had only several months before being diagnosed with leukemia. But the high cost of the treatment was not something that the Miller family was willing to spend. Samantha knew that if Lily didn't marry into the Brown family, Thomas wouldn't live for long without the treatment.
"I know,"
Lily replied, smiling. She was excited at the thought that her beautiful sister would have to marry an ugly and reclusive man.
"Our family doesn't have enough money for Thomas's treatment,"
Lily added with a sly expression.
"Come on, the wedding car is waiting for you. If you offend the Brown family, they might not be willing to pay the medical bills."
Samantha took one last look at the Miller family home, and her sad eyes filled with regret. "I should have never agreed to bring Thomas here," she thought. "This isn't our real home." Her heart sank as she lifted the hem of her wedding dress and got into the limousine. The church that was due to hold the wedding ceremony was the grandest church in Springfield. The Brown family had booked the venue, but very few guests turned up. When Samantha got out of the car, she saw several people in the distance looking at her with unbridled contempt. She felt embarrassed and uncomfortable. "Excuse me, but where is the groom?" she asked the young man who had taken her to the church. The man's name was Jack Smith. "Mr. Brown is not a healthy man," he replied in an expressionless voice, and Samantha felt like she was talking to a robot. "But what about the wedding?" she asked. "Mr. Brown won't be at the ceremony," he replied curtly as they walked toward the church. How can there be a wedding without the groom? She wondered. And why is the Brown family deliberately making things so difficult for me? She looked around at the unfamiliar place and the people she didn't know, and felt the sting of humiliation at the thought of getting married without a groom. She wanted to run away, but she knew that it was Thomas's only chance of getting the treatment he needed. She walked down the aisle toward the priest, telling herself that she had to follow through with the ceremony for the sake of her brother. At the same time, in a private room at the Marbella 77 nightclub, 3 young men were sitting and drinking. Unlike the bustling and noisy bar outside, the music in the large private room was performed live by a band. On one side of the wall was a huge curved screen showing a live stream of the wedding ceremony.
"Alex, your new wife is on the screen,"
said one of the men.
"Aren't you going to watch? She looks like she has a nice body. I think you could have some fun with her."
The man who had spoken was confident and handsome, and he was sitting on a couch with 3 beautiful women. Alexander was sitting alone on a separate couch. Alexander's features were chiseled and strong, but he had an arrogant and detached expression on his handsome face. He looked coldly at the glass in his hand as he swirled the liquid around. His movements were elegant and reserved. "She doesn't excite me," he said. Noah quickly waved his hand in frustration at his friend. Out of the corner of his eye, Alexander caught a glimpse of the woman on the big screen and saw that she was facing the priest. He noted that the wedding dress was incredibly beautiful and that the woman wearing it was tall and attractive. Her exposed arms and neck were slender, and her skin looked flawless. He knew that most men would find her desirable, but Alexander wasn't like most men. "Turn it off," he said dismissively.
If you're not interested in her, why are you marrying her?
Noah asked in confusion as one of the beautiful women next to him held up a glass for him to drink from. "Ignoring the fact that she's from a poor family, she's also your nephew's ex-girlfriend. You'll be the laughing stock of your family," he added. Alexander was supposed to take his place at the head of the Brown business empire, but after an accident when he was a teenager, rumors had circulated that he was deformed and sickly, and as a result, he hadn't become involved with the family business. But Alexander didn't care about the rumors. After the accident, he started his own business, and within 10 years, Blue Whale Enterprises had become one of the top multinational companies in the world. It was rumored that the mysterious CEO of Blue Whale Enterprises was both handsome and domineering, but his real identity was not public knowledge. Noah, Alexander's friend, was responsible for the entertainment side of Blue Whale Enterprises. "Marrying her serves a purpose," Alexander replied. He had only agreed to marry Samantha to reassure his grandmother, who had become increasingly concerned that he hadn't found a wife. Although Alexander was willing to marry a woman whom he had never met, he was annoyed that his grandmother had also told him that she expected him to have a child within the first year of his marriage. She warned him that without a grandchild, she would never agree to him divorcing his new wife. Noah glanced at one of the women next to him and noticed that she was looking interestedly in Alexander's direction. The woman stood up and walked nervously over to Alexander. "Would you like me to sit with you?" she asked, eyeing him flirtatiously. "Get lost," was his curt response. The voice was so powerful that the woman took a step backward and looked around, feeling embarrassed.
"Noah, you don't have a good memory, do you?"
asked Eric Wilson.
"Do you really think that Alex is like you?"
Eric didn't have Alexander's cold and domineering aura, nor did he have Noah's reckless manner. He had a more self-restrained air about him.
"Eric, you old virgin, don't you want Alex to finally get with a woman?"
Noah retorted. Noah and Eric began to bicker. Alexander ignored them. After the wedding ceremony, Samantha was taken in the limousine to Rock Hill Manor. Rock Hill Manor was an ancient castle-style manor house that was situated on one of the mountains in Springfield. As they entered the manor grounds, a security guard greeted them respectfully. Samantha looked up in wonder at the size of the building. She could see that the grounds were extensive, and she gazed out at the beautiful scenery in the distance. "He must be so rich," she thought as she looked around in awe. As she got out of the car, she noticed a row of staff who were all dressed in clothes that reminded Samantha of servants in British period dramas. "Good evening, Mrs. Brown," the workers said in unison. An older man, who was standing to one side from the rest of the staff, stepped forward and said,
"Please come in, Mrs. Brown. I'm the butler here. My name is Jim Rollins, but you can call me Jim."
"Thank you, Jim," she replied. She noted how the workers remained standing still in her presence, and she felt slightly embarrassed by the formality. She looked at the older man. "Jim, where is Mr. Brown?" she asked.
"Mr. Brown went out," he replied.
Samantha felt confused. How could a groom who's too weak to attend his own wedding ceremony go out? She wondered. It doesn't make any sense. He must be trying to humiliate me. "Jim, when does Mr. Brown come back? Can you tell me?" she asked.
"Of course, Mrs. Brown,"
the butler replied respectfully. Then he led her into the manor house and showed her upstairs to a guest room. Looking around the room, she suddenly felt very alone. 2 nights went by with no sign of Samantha's new husband. Despite the presence of the new staff in the huge manor house, she felt like a bird trapped in a cage. There's no wonder Lily wanted to swap places with me, she thought. On the third evening, Alexander returned to the manor. He was dressed in black trousers and a black shirt. He walked into the bright hallway of the main building at a leisurely pace. His brown eyes looked cold and distant. When he saw a wedding celebration banner in the hall, he looked at it with disdain and shouted, "Tear it down!" Jim took Alexander's jacket and hurriedly looked at 2 passing maids. They immediately tore the banner off the wall. "Where is she?" Alexander asked.
"Your wife is in her room," Jim replied. "I believe she has something to talk to you about, sir."
She probably wants to moan about something, Alexander thought. "Have her come and find me," he said over his shoulder as he walked up the stairs. A little while later, Samantha nervously stood at the door of the master bedroom. She knocked on the door a few times, but no one answered. She knocked again, but there was still no response, so she pushed the door open and entered. As she walked through the door, she was amazed to find herself in what looked like a living room. Beyond the living room, she saw the master bedroom, in which she noticed an enormous bed and 2 doors to the sides that she assumed were bathrooms. The entire living space was decorated in a Gothic style with antique furniture. She looked in fascination at the art on the walls, which was a mix of both classic and contemporary styles. As she walked into the living room area, she looked around nervously. "Alexander?" she said in a timid voice. Jim said he was in here, she thought, feeling increasingly uneasy. Then she noticed what looked to her like a figure standing behind a wicker folding screen. She took a deep breath and walked closer, intending to talk to her new husband through the screen, seeing it as an opportunity to reduce the awkwardness between them. "Alexander, Alex, I'm sorry that it's so late, but," she began. There was no reply from the other side of the screen, so she carried on. "I know you don't like me, and don't worry, I won't bother you. It's just that I'd like to discuss a couple of things with you." She paused again, but there was still no reply. "I'm still at college, you see. I want to go back to continue my studies, and I'd like to visit my brother every week." She also wanted to enter a modeling competition called Road to the Top, but she was reluctant to ask too many questions in one go. "Alex, I know it's rude to speak to you through the screen, but I heard that you don't like to see other people. Actually, I feel that a person's appearance is only a part of who they are. What someone is like on the inside is much more important to me than what they look like. Do you think that maybe you should see more of the outside world?" When Alexander came out of the bathroom, he saw Samantha speaking to herself as she faced the screen. Her long black hair fell to her waist, and she wore a conservative light blue dressing gown. Samantha shuffled her feet nervously as she wondered why the figure behind the screen wasn't replying to her.
"Whom are you calling ugly?"
said a deep voice from behind her. In the Gothic-style room, the sudden sound of a man's voice behind her made her jump, and she shouted in panic. When she turned around, she saw a half-naked man standing less than 2 meters away from her, a towel wrapped around his waist. She saw that he was very tall and muscular. She noticed how his chest and abdominal muscles stood out proudly, while his broad shoulders were accentuated by his slender and toned waist. "He looks better than any of the models I've ever seen," she thought, appraising his toned physique. She looked up at his face and saw with surprise that although his expression was cold and distant, his features were even and handsome. "He's the kind of man that women would go crazy for," she thought. Who are you?" she asked, confused by the mysterious man's sudden arrival. Then, suddenly self-aware, she covered her eyes and turned around, her face reddening. Alexander's lips curled up into a sneer. "How does she have the audacity to come into my room and ask who I am, like I don't have a right to be here?" he thought. He was instantly suspicious of her intentions. "She's quite a good actor," he thought. "I'll give her that." Countless women have tried to seduce Alexander over the years, many of whom were extremely beautiful, and they had used a variety of methods. He had seen quite a few of them act in what he thought was mock innocence. When he suspected that women were trying to seduce him, it made him feel like they were mocking him, and the thought of it angered and disgusted him. "Are you trying to play dumb to get my attention?" he asked in a cold voice. "What does he mean?" Samantha wondered. She started to cry. Turning back to the screen, she said, "Alex, I don't know why that man is saying those things." Then she turned back to the handsome man. "Please don't hurt me. I'm married," she said. "My new husband is frail and disfigured, but I'm not interested in you." "Ha!" Alexander scoffed, his expression hard. Then he strode over to the screen and kicked it over, revealing a mannequin that was wearing his latest tailored suit. Samantha looked on in shock. "I've been talking to a dummy," she thought, "and a headless one at that." Alexander turned around, and for the first time, he saw his wife's face clearly. He noticed her large eyes, delicate nose, and red lips. "She's beautiful," he thought, "but she has a pure look about her as well." Then he shook his head, irritated by his own distraction. Not only did she think I was a headless mannequin, he thought, she also called me disfigured. He took a step towards her and stood over her with an angry expression. Not knowing what he was going to do, Samantha looked up at him with panic in her eyes. "Instead of pretending to be stupid, why don't you take off your clothes?" he said scornfully. "Then I might take another look at you." She looked up at his dark eyes, her feet frozen on the spot. Her face paled, and she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Whoever he is, maybe he just wants me to apologize," she thought. "I'm sorry," she said, feeling embarrassed. Samantha had intentionally worn a conservative dressing gown, not wanting to cause offense to her new husband or to come across as undignified. But the collar of her nightgown was large, and without Samantha noticing, it had opened up wide, revealing her slender neck and the top part of her chest. Alexander felt his eyes drawn to her, and he was shocked by his own feeling of attraction. "She's trying to make a fool out of me," he thought angrily. "Get out!" he yelled, with fury in his dark eyes. She turned and ran out of the room without looking back. Hearing the commotion, Jim, who had been downstairs, went to see what was going on. He met Samantha as she ran into the hallway. After Jim explained to her that it was Alexander she had seen, she wanted to cry. "But I was told that he's sickly and deformed," she said.
"Mrs. Brown, unfortunately, rumors don't stop at the wise," he replied. Although the rumors about him being ugly might not be true, it's certainly true what people say about his temper, she thought. Samantha was aware that it was getting late, and she sighed dejectedly. "Now that I've offended my new husband, how can I ask him what I wanted to ask him?" she thought. She felt that without Alexander's agreement, she wouldn't be able to leave the manor and head out down the mountain. The next morning, Samantha awoke to the sound of the ringtone on her phone. When she looked at the caller ID, she frowned. "Hello, Dad," she said sleepily.
"Have you given your new husband a present yet?"
Chris Miller asked.
"Remember, you need to make a good impression."
Why is that the first thing he asks me? She wondered. Doesn't he care at all about how I am or how I feel? Samantha thought back to the words her father had said to her before her marriage.
"If you don't marry that man, I'll throw you and Thomas out,"
he had threatened. When she heard those words, Samantha had felt the last of her hope drain away.
"A gift will arrive today,"
he said.
"Make sure you give it to him."
She suppressed the pain in her heart and said, "Dad, please keep my marriage a secret from Thomas. I'm afraid he won't accept it."
"What do you mean he might not accept it?"
her father asked.
"You're lucky to be able to marry into the Brown family. Just make sure that you do as you're told and don't upset anyone.
She knew that, other than Thomas, no one in her family would care how she felt. Later that morning, a box wrapped in elaborate paper was delivered to the house with a note saying that it was for Samantha to give to her new husband. Not knowing what was inside, she picked up the gift and went to find Alexander. She found out from one of the maids that Alexander was in his study. When she got to the large, ornate study door, she knocked on it, but there was no answer. She was surprised when the door opened automatically. Samantha stepped into a huge room, which was furnished with antique bookcases filled with books on various topics. She saw that Alexander was sitting on a high-backed leather chair behind a large oak desk. The morning light shone through the windows, illuminating half of his face, and she noticed again how handsome he looked. How on earth are there rumors that he's ugly? She wondered. Alexander looked at her with a cold expression, as if he was questioning why she had dared to enter his private space. "Alex, my dad asked me to bring you a present," she said, stepping forward nervously with the box. Alexander observed her with a suspicious expression. "Bring it over," he instructed. She felt overwhelmed by his domineering aura, but she walked towards him and placed the package on his desk. Alexander glanced at the beautifully wrapped gift box before him and raised his chin. "Go ahead and open it," he said in a stern voice. Opening the gift box, she found an antique gold-plated knife. The blade was smooth and the handle was inlaid with a ruby. Alexander looked disinterestedly at the gift. Samantha handed it to him. He turned it over in his hand and fiddled with it for a short while. The ruby reflected brightly in the morning light. He was about to place the knife back inside the box when something inside caught his eye. He reached down and picked up 2 pieces of cloth. Holding them aloft, he looked at Samantha and sneered. "Is this a new method to seduce me?" he asked. Confused, Samantha looked closely at the tiny pieces of cloth in his hand. The next moment, Alexander flung them at her. One landed on her head, and the other landed on her shoulder. She picked them up and looked more closely at them. It dawned on her that they were skimpy leopard print lingerie. Horrified, Samantha reddened and threw the underwear back into the box. "This isn't from me," she exclaimed, feeling deeply humiliated. When Alexander saw her red face and shocked expression, he assumed that she was acting innocent. "What are you pretending for?" he shouted. "Do you take me for a fool?" "I've never even opened this box before. How could I possibly have put these things inside?" she asked incredulously. "It's not from me." Alexander stood up and strode over to her, the anger on his face clear to see. She took a few steps backward, but he reached out and took a hold of her chin. "Are you saying you want to come to my bed wearing those things?" he asked. "No, I don't want that at all," she protested. "What did you just say?" he asked, feeling deeply insulted. "I just meant to say that I didn't prepare this gift," she explained. I don't want to go to your bed wearing that." She stepped backward away from him again and found her back pressed against the cold bookshelf behind her. "Are you playing games with me?" he asked. Why is he so unreasonable, she thought. Can he understand that it's not from me? Then she suddenly recalled seeing Lily go into a lingerie store the day before her wedding. Lily must have put it in the box, she thought angrily. She raised her eyes to look at him and saw contempt in his eyes. She remembered a rumor that she had heard that, after being insulted at a dinner, Alexander had beaten another man, leaving him completely paralyzed. Then she thought back to the previous night when he had kicked over the screen, and she wondered how bad his temper could get. "Alex, I'm sorry. I've never seen it before," she said, trying to calm him down. "Don't try to seduce me again," he said. If you do, I'll have you thrown out, he said. Now get out of my study and leave me in peace. Alexander suspected that members of his family had been trying to use beautiful women to seduce him so that they could spy on him. He had chosen to marry a woman from the Miller family so that it would stop their attempts, but he was still very suspicious of any woman who showed an interest in sleeping with him. Even so, hearing his new wife say that she didn't want to go to his bed had hurt him deeply. Samantha went back to her room, feeling confused and upset. She took out her cell phone and called her sister. "Lily, did you pack the lingerie in the gift box?" she asked.
So what if I did?
Lily replied, feeling proud of herself. "Why are you doing this, Lily? You already have Brady, and I've done what you want me to do. Why are you making things more difficult for me?" she asked, feeling close to tears.
Obviously, I want to help make sure that you have a fulfilling marriage,
she replied.
Unfortunately, with your husband's frail condition, I'm afraid he won't be able to perform, so I'm helping you out a little.
Lily paused to laugh. Then she continued.
By the way, I'm curious, just how ugly is your husband?
Lily felt nothing but bitterness towards her sister. She hated how beautiful she was, and she hated that she had dated Brady first. She enjoyed the feeling of making her suffer. Samantha hung up the phone in disgust. I would love to see Lily's expression when she finds out how handsome my husband actually is, she thought. Then she thought about how bad his temper was, and she felt a pang of sadness. I've no idea why he wanted to marry me, but it's clear that he doesn't like me at all, she thought. I'll have to try my best not to offend him. Maybe it would be best if he just asked me for a divorce. Later that day, Samantha received a call from her manager, Rose Williamson, asking her to go to work the next day to discuss a job opportunity. It was the first time in several months that she had been offered work. Gathering her courage, Samantha went to find her husband. She found him sitting on the couch reading a financial magazine. "Excuse me, Alex," she began timidly. "As you know, I'm a model, and I have to go to the agency tomorrow to see my manager. I hope you don't mind me going." She paused for a moment, but when Alexander didn't reply, she carried on. "I promise I won't divulge any information about you." She didn't want to be trapped in the manor for the rest of her life. She felt that her dream of becoming a famous model was getting closer, and she was determined not to let anything or anyone stand in her way. She wanted to take care of her brother, and she wanted to make money of her own. Alexander looked up from his paper and met her gaze. He was surprised to find that she looked sincere. Without thinking, he said, "Sure." The next morning, Samantha went straight to her manager's office. The company that Samantha worked for was called Glamathon Entertainment, and her father was the CEO. Samantha was surprised to find that Lily was already in the office.
Sam, long time no see,
Lily said with a mocking smile on her face. She was wearing a red dress, and her makeup was flawless. Samantha avoided looking at her sister. She turned her attention to Rose and said, "So, what kind of job is it, Rose?" "Hello, Sam," Rose said, smiling. "Well, there's an evening show at Marbella 77. You'll need to prepare for it."
Rose, Marbella 77 is a nightclub. That seems like a strange place to do modeling,
Samantha protested. Marbella 77 was an exclusive nightclub in Springfield. It was a very expensive establishment, and it was the favorite place for the rich and famous people of Springfield to go for a night out. "What's wrong with a nightclub?" Rose asked, smiling. "There will be lots of big shots there tonight. Daniel Dimitri, the event manager of Road to the Top, will be there. It's a really big opportunity for you." Lily twirled her hair, her beautiful eyes slightly raised as she looked at Samantha with a look of disdain. "Is Lily going to be there?" Samantha asked. Lily is a popular model now, Rose replied, her smile disappearing. She can't work in a place like that. You're still trying to find your feet, so you should be glad of any work that comes your way. Just don't mess up tonight, okay? Samantha frowned but didn't say anything. Don't forget, you've signed a contract with the company, Rose continued. If you don't comply, there's a $1 million penalty to pay. The previous year, Samantha had entered the modeling agency, and she had been made to sign a contract that left her without the right to deny work. Over the course of the year, Lily had gone from being a nameless, aspiring model to a rising star, even winning a competition for the best newcomer in the industry. As for Samantha, during that time, she had struggled to get any work at all. But Samantha was beginning to suspect that the show she was expected to work at might be a setup where she could be required to sleep with one of the organizers of the Road to the Top competition. Lily had entered the Road to the Top competition, but Samantha was convinced that she would have to cheat if she was going to stand any chance of winning.
Samantha, I'm thirsty. Can you make me a cup of coffee? Lily asked.
Why would I go and make your coffee? Samantha replied. Just make her the coffee, Sam, said Rose. Rose knew that although Samantha and Lily were both daughters of the CEO of Glamathon Entertainment, Lily was Chris's favorite. As a result, and much to Samantha's annoyance, Rose treated Lily better than her. Reluctantly, Samantha got up and went to make Lily a coffee. A little while later, she returned. Here's your cup of coffee, she said with mock politeness. Lily looked up with a smug expression, and she was shocked when Samantha stumbled and poured the coffee over her, staining her dress.
Hey! Lily shouted. What do you think you're doing?
It didn't scare you, did it? Rose asked, looking concerned. Lily shook her head as she looked down at the brown stain. Rose looked at Samantha and said, You can't even pour coffee without spilling it. Make Lily another one. Samantha lowered her eyes and tried to look apologetic. She had secretly placed ice into the coffee to cool it down, so she knew that her sister wouldn't be harmed. Lily looked up at her with contempt, but she was still so pleased with herself that it wasn't long before her mocking smile returned to her face. By the time Samantha had made Lily another coffee and handed it to her, Rose had left the room, leaving the two young women alone. Lily, aren't you afraid that Mr. Dimitri and the investors in the Top of the Road competition will be impressed by me tonight? Samantha asked. They might start to prefer me to you. Samantha had good prospects as a model. She was tall and beautiful, with a figure that most models would wish to have. And she was becoming increasingly confident. Lily, although also beautiful, was slightly shorter, and she felt threatened by her sister's looks. Lily looked at Samantha and quickly smiled to hide the look of envy on her face.
Sam, why do you think Rose agreed to let you participate in the competition? Let me tell you clearly. The only reason that you're in the competition is to pave the way for me. Once you've defeated the other strong opponents, you will lose to me, Lily said with a look of triumph on her face. I will be the final winner of the competition.
What? Samantha asked, an incredulous expression on her face. No wonder the company hasn't been giving me any work, she thought. They don't want me to get in the way of her success. As the suspicion that she had been manipulated took root in her mind, Samantha's last remnants of attachment to Glamathon Entertainment disappeared, and she decided to leave the company. I'm not going to pay that stupid penalty when I leave, she thought. Just as Samantha was about to speak, Lily suddenly raised her hand and spilled her own coffee onto herself.
Ow!
She shrieked. Samantha was confused for a moment until she heard a familiar man's voice from behind her. Lily! Brady exclaimed as he rushed past Samantha, knocking her out of the way. A tall, handsome man held Lily in his embrace and said, Lily, how are you? Are you scalded?
Does it hurt?" When Brady had pushed past her, Samantha stumbled into the desk and hurt her back slightly. But the pain in her body wasn't comparable to the sadness she felt at seeing her ex-boyfriend with Lily in his arms. She remembered how only weeks before they had been together. When Lily had stolen Brady from her, Lily used the situation as a way to justify asking Samantha to take her place in marrying Alexander.
Brady, I'm in so much pain. My hands hurt,
Lily complained.
What if I get scars? I'm a model. I can't have scars on my hands.
She looked up at her boyfriend with a sorrowful expression on her face, and then buried her face in his arms and wept. The coffee was very hot, but Samantha knew that as long as it was treated properly, there wouldn't be any scars. "Don't worry, Lily," Brady reassured her. "I won't let them scar." Then, Brady turned around, intending to confront the woman whom he had thought had bullied his girlfriend. He was shocked to see Samantha standing in front of him. "Sam!" he exclaimed, a smile spreading across his handsome face. When Samantha and Brady had been together, Samantha had wanted to take things slowly. And after they had been together for 2 months, the relationship still hadn't gone beyond holding hands and kissing. Brady had been interested in both Samantha and Lily, and Lily had seized an opportunity for them to drink alone together, which had resulted in them spending the night together. Brady looked shamefaced at Samantha and said, "I'm sorry I pushed you just then. I didn't mean to. Are you hurt?" As he spoke, he let go of Lily and walked toward Samantha. Lily was instantly afraid that his old feelings for Samantha would be rekindled, and she grabbed at his waist from behind and said,
Sam, I know that you're still upset about Brady and me getting together, but you can't just pour hot coffee on me. Anyway, you're married now, so don't try to come between us.
The Jackson family was one of the most prestigious families in Springfield, other than the mysterious Brown family. Brady was handsome and knew how to be romantic. Lily understood Brady well. He was arrogant and conceited, and he liked the feeling of being protective of a woman. As Lily had expected, the apologetic expression on Brady's face disappeared in the blink of an eye, and he glared at Samantha with hostility. "Nothing actually happened between Lily and me that night," he said. "It was you who refused to listen to my explanation, and it was also you who decided to marry Alexander for your own vanity. So stop trying to win me back. I'm with Lily now." "My vanity?" Samantha exclaimed, pointing at herself in disbelief. She was furious as she thought, "You actually think that I married Alexander because I wanted to? I was forced to marry that man." "Isn't it true?" Brady said with disdain. "Say it, Sam. Don't be afraid to admit it. Also, you should apologize to Lily immediately." Lily was hiding behind Brady, trying not to be seen. She cast a scornful look in Samantha's direction. Samantha laughed mockingly. "Good," she thought. "Very good. My family is clearly bearing its ugly side for the whole world to see. Anyway, a man like this isn't worth my attention." "Brady, listen carefully," she said, picking up her bag. "Based on the way you've acted today, I would choose Alexander over you anyways. And as for apologizing, that's never going to happen. You can both go to hell," she thought as she walked out the door. Brady gritted his teeth and reluctantly watched Samantha's departing figure. "What a beautiful woman," he thought. "Now she belongs to an ugly man who doesn't even appreciate what he has. What a waste." Most of the models in the night show at Marbella 77 weren't professional. They were only there to win the favor of potential customers. Samantha had arrived at the show late, and there were already many young models preparing backstage. "These are your outfits for tonight's show, ladies. Make us proud," Rose said. She was sure that Samantha wouldn't dare to protest whatever she was given, so she threw her an outfit with a smirk. It was a 2-piece sequined bathing suit made from fabric that was almost transparent.
After Rose left, Samantha started looking around at the other models, focusing her eyes on a beautiful woman who looked to her like she had some plastic surgery done on her face. The woman had a black dress in her hands and was looking at it disdainfully. Although it was designed to be tight and the back was exposed, Samantha thought it was much better than the tiny 2 pieces of cloth in her hands. "Hey, don't you like your dress?" she asked with a smile. "It's not sexy at all," the woman replied. "It covers up everything that shouldn't be. How could it be attractive? Of course I don't like it." The woman's eyes lit up when she saw what Samantha was holding. Now that would definitely attract everyone's attention, she thought. She smiled at Samantha and said, "Darling, why don't we swap?" "Sure," Samantha said, relieved. No one cares which model wears which clothes anyway, she thought. At Blue Whale Enterprises, Alexander and Noah were talking as they finished some documents. "Alex, there's a show happening tonight. Are you coming?" Noah asked. He loved to go out and was always the first to know what was going on in town. Naturally, he didn't want to miss the nighttime show at Marbella 77. "Nope, not interested," Alexander said, looking at the document in front of him without even blinking an eye. "Are you sure? It's at Marbella 77, and this time there are really some good-looking women. I've seen the photos already. One of them is called Samantha or something, and she's gorgeous," Noah continued, trying his best to persuade him to go. "She's got a magnificent body, and her face is really easy on the eyes, you know. I'd say she's one of the top 3 there tonight. You should really come and check it out." Noah knew that Alex was married, but he didn't know that his wife's new name was also Samantha. Alexander paused mid-signature on a document he was working on, and a cold light flashed past his emotionless eyes. "Isn't Samantha a model?" he thought. "Doesn't she have a show tonight? What a coincidence." After half a second, Alexander raised his head and said with a voice as cold as ice, "All right, let's go take a look." The show's main stage was covered with small blue lights, and the atmosphere was smoky and dark. The music said, raising his chin toward her and letting out a long whistle. "Damn." later, Rose said, dragging her toward the private room. Daniel's waiting for you. He's very satisfied with you. Please do your best to make him happy. When they arrived at his private room, Rose pushed Samantha in Daniel's direction. Samantha was relieved that she had prepared herself in advance. She moved deftly out of the way to stop him from groping her. Mr. Dimitri, are you happy with Samantha just like this? Rose asked.
Happy. Drink up, gorgeous,
he said. His lustful eyes looked at Samantha up and down as he handed her a glass, thinking, I can't wait to have this woman all to myself. Samantha's smile turned stiff as she forced herself to accept the wine. After bringing the glass to her mouth, she took it away again. Mr. Dimitri, I can have a drink with you, but first, I'd like to ask you a question.
Feel free to ask me anything, beautiful,
Daniel said, anxious for her to drink the glass of wine. He wanted to get her drunk so she would lower her inhibitions. How much did you pay Rose to give me to you? She asked.
Oh, you're a clever one, aren't you?
He said, laughing.
To tell you the truth, sweetie, you're not the first woman Rose has given to me, but you're by far the most beautiful, I'll give you that.
He might have a dirty mind, but at least he's honest, Samantha thought, amused. He just gave me everything I need. She touched the recorder behind her ear, and the corner of her mouth raised up in a smile. She hadn't expected to get the response she wanted so easily. Will you excuse me a minute? She said suddenly. I'm just going to go to the bathroom and freshen up. Before he could respond, she quickly got up and walked out the door. If I don't get out of here as soon as possible, she thought, I'm going to get into trouble. What are you doing, Sam? Rose asked when she saw her enter the hallway. Realizing that Samantha was running away, Rose looked at a group of security guards who were standing at the corner and yelled, Don't just stand there, chase after her. It didn't take long for the muscular men to catch up to her. She looked around desperately for a place to escape and ran into the first room she could see. She was relieved to see that it was dimly lit, and there were a lot of other seductively dressed ladies inside drinking. She smiled as she tried to blend in. Then, she grabbed a bottle of champagne to pour for the person sitting on the couch next to her. Alexander raised his eyes to look at the woman who was approaching him. Her black dress hugged her body, and he found her captivating. She crouched down in front of him to pour some champagne into his glass, and from his point of view, he could appreciate her flawless skin and seductive cleavage. She didn't need to do anything to attract attention to herself. She was naturally the most beautiful woman in the room. Suddenly, the door flew open with a loud sound, and a group of men barged in. What are you doing? Do you have any idea whose room this is? The host of the room snapped. We're looking for someone, the leader of the security guards said. Samantha stopped pouring and froze as she lowered her head, trying to shrink out of sight. Alexander looked at her without emotion. Throw them out, Noah said, annoyed at the people who were disturbing the party. Before the bodyguards could move, 3 more men in suits appeared and blocked their path. The men in suits were expressionless and seemed to outrank the bodyguards who had barged in. Boss, do you know what room this is? One of them whispered to his leader. His boss's face contorted as he realized where they were. Oh, damn it, he thought. We're in one of the VIP rooms. The people in here aren't people we can afford to offend. Sorry to have bothered you, he said, backing up slowly. We'll be leaving now. Enjoy your night. Just as Samantha was about to breathe a sigh of relief, the man beside her spoke. Who is it you're looking for? His voice was deep and sweet, like the sound of a cello. That voice sounds somewhat familiar, she thought as her heart skipped a beat. She cursed in her head when she realized who it was. She cautiously turned her head to look at him. His light brown eyes were gazing at her without any expression. Alex, what's he doing here? Samantha wondered. How long has he known I was here?
Sir, I'll tell you the situation. There's a woman who stole our boss's diamonds. We just saw her running into your room, so we were just trying to catch her," the security guard said apologetically.
Alex, they're lying, Samantha said, grabbing onto his pants and quietly begging. I didn't steal anything. They tried to give me to a man to have his way with me. He looked at her for a moment and thought, although I don't particularly like her, I suppose she's my wife after all. I can't let another man touch her, can I? Alexander looked at her indifferently. She looked back up at him, her eyelashes quivering. Her eyes were full of anxiety, but she didn't dare to say anything else. She placed all her hopes on him. He asked her quietly, "If I didn't help, what would you do? Why don't we find out?" Her eyes grew wide with shock. This man is so vile, she thought, horrified. The cries of the women in the room entered her ears. The security guards were looking at their faces one by one, and Samantha was sweating from anxiety. "Alex!" she cried out desperately. She was angry enough to call him by name, but her voice was barely audible. "Is this your job?" he asked her, loud enough only to be heard by her. She started to answer, but couldn't think of what more to say. His cold face was obscured by the dim lighting. He ignored her as if he were just going to let her get caught. The security guards were about to walk over to them, so Samantha mustered up all of her courage and sat on Alexander's lap. She put her hands around his neck and leaned her face forward. "What? What's going on here? I don't believe it," Noah said, dumbstruck. He looked at Samantha kissing Alexander as if he had seen a ghost. Alex seems completely uninterested in the woman here, he thought. Who's he kissing? The whole room went silent. The security guard stood on the spot, not daring to interrupt them. Alexander felt Samantha ease her soft body into his embrace. Then, he hugged her tightly, as if he was afraid that she would be pulled away. Her warm breath spread over him, and her scent filled the air. Her soft hair brushed his cheeks like feathers. Samantha had made the first move to get close to him. She was so nervous that her heart was about to jump out of her chest. "Darling," she said when she stopped, "they're killing the atmosphere. Can't you tell them to leave?" She disguised her voice so as to not be recognized by the men looking for her. Alexander felt an uncontrollable heat rush down towards his lower abdomen. He cursed silently. "Scram," he said, looking over at the security guard with a cold look in his eyes. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir," the man replied. The security guard was scared out of his wits and swallowed nervously. He thought, anyway, it can't be the woman we're looking for. It would be impossible for her to get to know him, much less kiss him in a short time. So he walked away, taking his men with him. The room was silent for a moment. No one dared to speak. When Noah regained his senses, he quickly took a photo of them and sent it to their other friend, Eric. Below the picture, he wrote a message. Someone just sat on Alex's lap and is kissing him. Eric wrote back, but his first reaction was disbelief. This photo had been edited. It can't be real. Look again. It's the real deal. Awesome. Who is that? His new wife? Nope, it's one of the models. What? Are you for real? Completely. So, is this your way of trying to seduce me? Alexander asked. His voice was extremely low and cold. His eyes were like ice, yet Samantha felt she sensed passion in them. "No, I'm not trying to seduce you, I swear," she said, feeling humiliated. What's his problem? She wondered. Not only did he not want to help me, he even let those people search for me when he could have had them thrown out earlier. "Then get off me," he roared. Sorry, she said, stuttering as she hurriedly tried to get off of his lap. In the process, she fell on top of him again uncontrollably. In that instant, she thought she felt something between his legs. Realizing what it was, she looked down at his lap in disbelief. But he had already crossed his legs, so it was impossible to tell if he was turned on. His cold face was contorted in an angry expression, and his eyes were dark and stormy. Did I just feel that? She thought. No, I must have been mistaken. He hates me so much that he couldn't possibly have been turned on. Aren't you willing to accept that I'm not interested in you? He asked, infuriated that he had had a physical reaction to her. Get off of me, woman. Alex, I was in a hurry earlier. I didn't want... She started to say, but quickly covered her face with her hands and gave up trying to explain. Anyway, thanks for what you just did for me. Before she could finish her words, she hurriedly ran off. Alexander closed his eyes in frustration and touched the corner of his mouth with his fingers. The soft sensation of her lips hadn't faded, and there was a strange sweetness to it. Noah's eyes shifted from the fleeing Samantha to Alexander. He was surprised that he had not received an order from him to stop her. Then, Eric sent another short message. Are you still alive? Noah felt like he was in an alternate reality. Can you believe it? The woman escaped unharmed. When Samantha arrived back at Rock Hill Manor, Alexander had still not returned. She decided to sit in the living room and wait for him.
Mrs. Brown, are you not going to bed?
Jim asked. Don't worry about me. I have something to talk to Alex about, she replied, looking at the time. It was already past midnight. She was afraid that Alexander would be angry that they had met in a place like Marbella 77. She was worried that if he vented his anger to her family, they might harm her younger brother, Thomas. The hands of the clock turned slowly. The house was completely silent. She was exhausted, and sleep was overtaking her. Her eyelids were getting heavy, and before she knew it, she fell asleep. It was after 3 o'clock by the time Alexander finally came home. When he opened the door, he saw a slim figure curled up on the couch with her hands under her head.
Sir, Mrs. Brown has been waiting for you, Jim explained. She said that she has something to talk to you about.
As Alexander walked closer, he gazed at Samantha's delicate and beautiful face. Her naked face after taking off her makeup was much more pleasing to his eye than her fiery red lips at night. Because she was lying on her side, her face was squeezed together by the back of her hand, and her mouth was puckered up. The way she looked lying there and the person that Alexander had seen on stage seemed like two completely different people. Her cherry red lips moved a few times, as if she were talking in her sleep. He listened closely. Alex, she murmured. Her voice was heavy with sleep. He shuddered as he listened. Then he heard her say clearly, "Idiot, big idiot." His face instantly darkened, and he turned around to head upstairs.
Sir, what about Mrs. Brown?
Jim asked, pointing at the woman sleeping soundly on the couch. Don't worry about it, he replied. Go to bed. Jim covered Samantha with the blanket and reluctantly left the room as well. She slept all night on the couch, waiting for Alexander to return. In her dreams, she was scolding him. Samantha didn't have a peaceful sleep. Her thoughts were racing all night. She thought about what had happened the night before at Marbella 77. She thought about her so-called job, about Alex's behavior, and about the reaction of his body when she had kissed him. A wave of fierce anger rose inside her. She also thought about Thomas. She dreamed that he was being ignored in the hospital by her family and that he had no money to continue his chemotherapy treatment. She woke up terrified, her forehead covered with a cold sweat. Her body stiffened, and the pain brought her back to reality. She sat up and looked around her, puzzled. It was already dawn, and the eastern sky outside the window was overflowing with a white glow. She looked at the time. It was almost 6 o'clock. Have I been sleeping on the couch all night? she wondered, slightly annoyed. At the entrance, Alexander's coat was hanging on the coat rack. He obviously returned during the night, but purposefully ignored me, she thought. It's a good thing the weather was so nice last night. She went upstairs to freshen up. When she went downstairs again, she found Alexander sitting at the head of the table, a financial magazine by his side. She looked at him and thought, if Lily had known that he wasn't ugly, that he was handsome even, she never would have forced me to marry him. And if that were the case, I wouldn't have to face such a despicable person every day. Good morning, Alex, she said in a friendly tone. No matter how much she hated him, she knew she couldn't openly show it. He didn't even bat an eyelid. He acted as if he didn't hear or see her at all. The maid in the room nodded to her in respect. She stood awkwardly with a cold feeling inside. Alex, I can explain what happened last night. You see, there was a man— Shut up, he roared, glaring at her. I'm not interested in hearing it. He continued, but I will give you a warning. Even if I don't like you, we're married, and I do expect you to keep your loyalty as my wife. I haven't been disloyal, she cried out. She swallowed down all her anger as she thought, fine, if you don't want to hear it, I won't waste my breath. I'm not going to try to explain it to you a third time.
Miss Brown, please sit down and eat. Your breakfast is getting cold, Jim said, pulling out a chair for her to sit on. Jim had been sent to the house by Alexander's mother. He had watched him grow up and held a trusted position in the Brown family. He was the only one who dared to speak his mind. Samantha sighed in relief and looked gratefully at the old man. The new chef is terrible, Alexander said, suddenly throwing his fork back onto his porcelain plate. His face was dark and cold. This is an abuse of my stomach, he thought. Samantha noticed that his fingers looked— Alexander raised his eyes, his expression cold and mocking. What right do you have to discipline me? He asked. In the morning, his temper was especially bad. She started to say, but stopped herself. I'm only trying to help, she thought, because I heard you're weak and sick. God, you're such a jerk. She lightly bit her lower lip and lowered her eyes. Obviously, he's not going to accept any advice from me, she thought. Why am I even trying? Alexander could guess that she was secretly cursing him. He leaned his tall body back in his chair and said, Why don't you go cook breakfast for me? What? She asked, surprised. She thought she had misheard him. From now on, if you can't cook it, you don't have a right to eat it, he said. You just like the sound of your own voice, don't you? She thought angrily. You're just looking for a reason to push me around. Give me a break. She sensed that Alexander was trying to make things difficult for her. She's probably never entered a kitchen before in her life, he thought. Look at the family she was raised by, and the kind of work she does. When Samantha saw the look on his face, she knew he was thinking that she wouldn't be able to make anything decent. So, gritting her teeth in anger, she said, No problem, I'll do it. What he didn't know is that cooking was her passion. In fact, she ran a cooking blog with millions of followers. She knew her way around the kitchen and was ready to rub it in his face. 10 minutes later, she returned with a picture-perfect omelet, golden brown on the outside and juicy on the inside. It was made with fresh vegetables, and even to Alexander's discerning nose, it smelled delicious. Served on a simple and elegant white porcelain dish with a light sauce drizzled on top, the presentation was impeccable. This is what you're giving me, Alexander said when he saw it, his face contorted in disgust. Try it. I promise it'll taste good, and it's easy on the stomach, she said, placing the plate in front of him. As a food blogger, Samantha was proud of her cooking, but she was the only one that ever got to taste it. She hoped that there would be one more person who liked her cooking. And even though she despised him, she wanted his approval.
He eyed the omelet with suspicion, but he liked the soft color, the scent of the eggs, and the way the vegetables were mixed together. He was about to tell her to get out, but the words stopped before they could come out of his mouth. He picked up the fork and stared at the omelet for a few seconds, as if trying to decide if he was going to put it into his mouth. The first bite was rich and mellow, and it melted in his mouth. There was a little sweetness in its aftertaste. He hadn't expected it to taste so nice, and he closed his eyes instinctively with satisfaction. When he opened them again, a peculiar emotion flashed through his eyes. This taste, he thought, it reminds me of something. It gives me goosebumps, just like something from my memories. How very strange. Alexander lifted his eyes and stared intently at Samantha. "How did you do this?" he said, grabbing her wrist. She was scared by his reaction and wasn't able to articulate that she had known how to cook since she was young. He released her hand and lowered his eyes, trying not to let his feelings show. Why does this remind me of something? He thought. I'm being ridiculous. How is it? Do you like it? She asked in a nervous yet expectant manner. She struggled to tell what he was thinking. He threw his fork back onto the plate with a loud sound. It's unpalatable, he declared. Unpalatable? How is that possible? She thought, shocked. Did I do something wrong? She took a bite of the omelet to verify for herself. I think it's pretty good, she said. Alexander looked at her delicate skin and her strawberry-colored lips. She had a pure and charming face, and every gesture she made captivated him. The corner of his mouth, which she had kissed the night before, was still burning. He frowned, and his gaze turned as sharp as an arrow. Get out of here, he said. If you don't like it, then don't eat it. Don't take it out on me, she thought, as she went back upstairs to her room, fuming mad. He crossed his arms and stared at the remains of the omelet. In his mind, it looked appetizing. The colors were appealing, and it was served in an attractive way. But there was something different about it. Compared to the exquisite dishes that he was used to, it had a kind of intimate and casual feeling that made him nostalgic. After a while, he picked up the fork once more, cut off a large portion, and put it in his mouth. It had a lingering sweetness that reminded him of something from years ago. It soothed all irritation and disgust he usually felt towards food in the morning. Have the kitchen make me the same thing, he said to the chef when he came through to the dining room. The chef's hands trembled when he heard his instructions. Sir? He asked, shocked. He actually wants me, a 5-star chef, to cook such ordinary food? He thought. But no matter how much he resented it, he knew he had to follow his orders. 10 minutes later, another omelet was served on a plate beside the first. It looked almost exactly identical to the one Samantha had made. Alexander took a bite. It tastes like wax, he thought, disgusted. He took another bite of the omelet, which had been cooked by Samantha. It was so delicious that he ate it all up in a few bites. How can it be that the food cooked by my 5-star chef doesn't appeal to me at all, but the food that this woman has cooked has given me back my appetite? He wondered. When Samantha arrived upstairs, she realized that she had left her breakfast. After a moment of hesitation, she decided to rush downstairs and get it. She was hungry, and she had been looking forward to her breakfast. I'll just go in and out. I won't be in front of him for more than a few moments, she reasoned. She walked into the dining hall with trepidation and was stunned by the sight before her. The omelet that Alexander had called unpalatable had been eaten up entirely. Only moments before, he had been devouring it in big bites. Who invited you to come back down? He asked. He looked over at her with a face as dark and heavy as the clouds before a storm. I'm sorry, I came back for my breakfast, she said, stretching out her finger and carefully pointing at the other omelet on the table. It had cooled down enough that it was no longer steaming, but it was still warm. Alex, you're not disgusted with my food, are you? Was it okay? she muttered in dissatisfaction. If becoming a supermodel was her dream, cooking was her hobby. She enjoyed making food that brought happiness to others. He said that he despised it, but with a turn of my back, he ate it all, she thought. He looked at her, his handsome face filled with coldness.
Mrs. Brown, it's such a shame to waste food. That is, of course, why Mr. Brown reluctantly had to eat it, explained Jim, who was at her side. It had been a long time since Alexander had had such an appetite, and Jim was very impressed. How dare he talk such nonsense, she thought, as it occurred to her that Jim might not be as kind as he seemed. Do you have any objection? Alexander asked, glaring icily at her. No, she replied, picking up her breakfast as quickly as she could. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to eat upstairs. Returning to her room, she let out a deep breath before happily eating her breakfast. As she ate, she recalled Alexander's reaction when he had first tasted her omelet. It was very strange, she thought. He seemed emotional. She couldn't figure it out. Then, she recalled the scene from the night before when she had sat on his lap, his powerful thighs just underneath her. Their skin had only been separated by a thin layer of trousers. She had felt the heat of his body. What a shame that he's such a jerk, she thought. The night before, she had acted on impulse. She realized at that moment that although Alexander hated her, he had let her kiss him, and he had saved her. After breakfast, she took her plate downstairs. When she found that Alexander wasn't around, she quickly washed it up and put it back in the cupboard. Then, she received a call from her manager. Rose cursed at her loudly from the other end of the line. You little tramp, you think you're so good that you can go against me, do you? When I get my hands on you, I'm going to kill you. Samantha took the phone away from her ear until she heard silence. When she thought that her manager had finished speaking, she said, Rose, are you done? I have something to say to you. Speak. If you don't explain to me what happened last night, I'm going to beat it out of you, Rose roared. The night before, after Samantha had escaped, they couldn't find her anywhere. Rose had been scolded by Daniel and humiliated in front of everyone. She was livid. I want to cancel my contract, Samantha said. Cancel your contract? Rose scoffed. Sam, who do you think you are? You would have to pay a breach of contract. Do you have that kind of money? I want to terminate the contract, and I won't pay the penalty, Samantha said firmly. When I went back to the office last night, I happened to see you and Abraham, the director of the finance department, together. You were being quite intimate. I wonder what would happen if your husband were to find out about that. Rose's husband is a hot-tempered CEO of a big company, thought Samantha. If he knew that she was cheating on him, he would kick her out of the house for sure. Are you threatening me? Rose asked. Even through the phone, Samantha could sense the hatred that Rose felt for her. She continued. Rose, I'm going to send you a little audio message that I'd like you to listen to. Rose opened the message, and her face slowly grew red with anger and embarrassment. She heard Samantha's voice say, How much did you pay Rose to give me to you? Then she listened to Daniel's response. To tell you the truth, sweetie, you're not the first woman Rose has given to me. But you're by far the most beautiful, I'll give you that. Rose knew it was all over. Rose, I know that there are a lot of unspoken rules in the world of modeling, Samantha began. But ask yourself, if I post this online, would you survive the backlash? When your husband kicks you out and the company fires you, you'll need to think about what you want to do with the rest of your life. Samantha, you can't post that online. Okay, you win. What is it that you want exactly? Rose said, panicking. She hadn't made Samantha out to be such a ruthless person. Rose, I know that my father has given you full authority over the business to you, and you have the legal right to enforce my contract,
But if you destroy my contract, all of this will become our little secret." After a long silence, Rose finally said, "Okay, I'll do it." She realized that not only would she have to cover the money in compensation for terminating Samantha's contract, but she would also have to face the boss. "I have to do it. I don't have any other choice," Rose thought. "I swear I'm going to kill this woman. She's going to pay for this." In order to prevent Rose from playing any tricks, Samantha asked her to tear up the contract and send it to her, along with a signed letter acknowledging that she was freed from all contractual obligations. Later that day, she received a delivery of a letter with Rose's signature and the red stamp of Glamathon Entertainment. She was so excited that she jumped around the room. Now, she thought, I won't be restricted and pressured by the company. I can work toward my dream of becoming a model independently. Without the company, I can quickly earn enough money for my brother. She took a photo of the letter and sent it to her best friend, Ava Dawson. Ava was from a rich family that had been famous in Massachusetts. Her father had died suddenly, and her brother had been injured overseas. Despite the fact that she had fallen in status, countless men were drooling over her. Surprisingly, none of them had succeeded. Ava quickly replied with a message. Not bad at all. What do you plan on doing next?" Samantha sat down to continue the conversation. "The Road to the Top competition is next month. Before that, I should take on some more work to earn some money. In the future, maybe I can bring Thomas here with me and leave my family for good." Ava's reply was short. "Hold on, I'll see what I can find." A short while later, she sent a link over. It was a recruitment advertisement for models for a car show. The event was the country's highest-profile car show of the year, and it was sponsored by Blue Whale Enterprises. It looks like it pays well, Samantha thought. Samantha's only concern was that the car show models usually had to wear revealing outfits. She rarely took jobs that involved wearing revealing clothes, but she needed the money. When the time comes, she thought, I'll choose a more conservative brand. She quickly went online to register and sent a thumbs-up emoji to Ava, along with the message, "Thanks, girl." Ava replied, "No need to thank me. You would do the same for me." She's a true friend, Samantha thought. She's always there for me. Friends like her are one in a million. With new hope, she was enthusiastic about doing her morning exercise. Every day, early in the morning, she would get up and run, and then find a suitable corner to stretch and practice her steps. Later, after taking a shower, she would practice her facial expressions and poses in front of a mirror. When Alexander had finished his own exercises, he saw her tall and graceful figure standing right in his path. She had one leg over the railing and was softly leaning her upper body over to embrace her calf. Her long legs were thin and straight, and her waist was slender. She was delicate and soft, like a flower. "What are you doing?" he asked, his cold voice ringing out from behind her while she was switching legs. "Ah!" she screamed, not realizing that he had been standing just behind her. She lost her balance and instinctively reached out to grab something to stop herself from falling. What she managed to get a hold of was his shirt. He hadn't expected her to suddenly pull on his clothes and was not prepared to support her weight. His body leaned forward without any warning. As he tried to steady himself and regain his balance, he saw her face coming closer. Her soft lips pressed against his. His mind went blank, and he blinked his eyes. He couldn't believe what was happening. He moved his lips to confirm what he was touching. Realizing what she had just done, she pushed him away again, just as suddenly. "Alex, she started to say as she collected herself. "It's not what you think." She was so nervous and embarrassed that her cheeks were burning. His expression was cold as he glared at her.